poured my husband's coffee the morning he told his colleagues I was his greatest disappointment, and I never once mentioned that I had just quietly signed a deal worth $87 million. He liked his coffee with 1 sugar and a splash of oat milk. I had been making it that way for 11 years. I sat it beside his laptop without a word, the way I always did, and he didn't look up. That was a Tuesday in late October. The trees along our street in Oakville were doing that thing they do just before everything goes bare. All amber and copper, almost too beautiful to be real. I remember standing at our kitchen window watching a leaf let go of the branch and thinking, that's it. That's exactly what I'm about to do. My husband, I'll call him what he was, my husband, because that is the only title that still feels honest, had built his entire identity around being the serious one, the earner, the one with the real career. He was a senior partner at a commercial real estate firm in Toronto, the kind of man who wore his job title the way other men wear cologne. You smelled it before he walked into a room. I'd spent the better part of a decade building a small indie game studio out of the second bedroom of the house we shared. I started it the year after we married, with $20,000 I inherited from my grandmother in Winnipeg and a genuinely embarrassing amount of stubbornness. He tolerated it the way you tolerate a neighbor's wind chimes, with the kind of patience that is really just thinly dressed contempt. It's a hobby, he told people. Not to me directly, always sideways, always in that tone that made it land harder than an insult would have. She's very passionate about her little games, he'd say at dinner parties, and the smile he offered afterward was the kind that closed a door. I had one game that did moderately well, a narrative puzzle game I released through a small publisher when we were 3 years into the marriage. It paid our second car. That was nice. He acknowledged it the way you acknowledge a child's drawing on the fridge, proud in theory, not particularly moved in practice. Then I spent 6 years building something else, something I didn't talk about. Not because I was hiding it exactly, I just learned, somewhere around year 2 of that marriage, that sharing things with him meant handing him the ability to dismiss them. So I kept it close. My studio, my code, my concept, the engine I'd spent 3 years developing. A procedural storytelling engine that could generate emotionally coherent narrative branches at scale. The kind of thing that, as it turned out, a lot of people in the entertainment and tech sector had been circling around for years. I had a meeting with a Vancouver-based interactive media company in the spring of what turned out to be our last year of marriage, then a second meeting, then a very quiet, very serious conversation with their legal team and a licensing specialist from a firm in Montreal. I didn't tell my husband. I didn't tell anyone, actually. I had one friend, Josephine. We'd been close since our undergrad days at Western, who knew something big was in motion, but even she didn't know the full number. What she did know was that my husband had started staying late in a way that had a different quality to it, not the usual ambitious man building his empire late. A particular kind of late, the kind where he checked his phone at dinner with a softness in his eyes that had nothing to do with me. I want to say I was blindsided. But I think the honest version is that I had spent about 8 months slowly understanding something I didn't have the words for yet. Her name is irrelevant. She was 31. She worked in his firm's leasing division. I found out on a Thursday evening when I came home early from a client call in Hamilton and found a blazer in our front hall that wasn't mine and wasn't his. He didn't apologize. Not that night. What he did instead was sit down at our kitchen island and explain, like I was a stakeholder in a bad quarter, that he had not been happy for a long time, that he needed something different, and that he thought we both knew this hadn't been working. What hasn't been working? I asked. My voice was very calm. I remember being surprised by that. This, he said, gesturing at, what? The kitchen? Me? The general arrangement of our life? You've been checked out for years, Fiona. You sit in that room with your computer. I have no idea what you're even doing in there. Fiona. That's me. You've never asked, I said. He had the decency to be quiet for a moment. Then, I don't think either of us was really committed. That was the sentence that settled into me and stayed. Because what he meant, what I understood him to mean, was that I had not been committed in a way he recognized. That whatever I had been building in that room did not constitute effort in his ledger. That I had been a disappointment, and disappointments don't get to make demands. We filed for divorce 3 months later. By that point, I had moved into a rental on the east side of the city, a small one-bedroom near the lakeshore in Scarborough that cost more than I would have liked but had good light and a view of the water on clear days. I took my laptop, my external drives, my grandmother's quilt, and almost nothing else. He kept the house, the furniture, the car, most of what we'd built together financially, because, as he and his lawyer pointed out, most of those assets were tied to his income and his investments. My studio had never produced anything, his lawyer said in that measured legal tone, that could be considered a meaningful marital asset. I signed. I had my own lawyer. Josephine had made me promise that much, a family law specialist named Rosalind who practiced out of a small firm in Etobicoke. Rosalind was the kind of person who asked very precise questions and wrote everything down in a very neat hand. She reviewed the separation agreement and made one small addition on my behalf, a clause specifying that any intellectual property I had developed independently, funded through personal inheritance, and not commercialized during the marriage would remain solely mine, regardless of post-separation timing. My husband's lawyer glanced at it and said it was fine. My husband didn't even ask what it meant. He signed it in the same meeting where he said, to no one in particular, I just want this to be done. It was done on a Wednesday. I took the subway back to Scarborough and sat in my apartment eating a bowl of fro from the place on Kingston Road and watched the lake go grey in the afternoon light. I felt something that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite relief, more like the particular silence after a sound you've been hearing for so long, you stop noticing it. 6 weeks later, I signed the licensing agreement for my engine, $87 million, paid in 3 tranches through a licensed commercial agreement with royalties on downstream revenue. The company's legal team had wanted to move faster, but my grandmother's money, all 20,000 of it, had bought me enough shares in my own studio that I had the leverage to take my time. The deal closed on a Friday. Josephine took me to a restaurant in the distillery district, and we drank a very good bottle of champagne, and she kept looking at me like I had just come back from a very long trip somewhere. Are you happy? She asked. I think I'm going to need a minute to find out, I said. I did not call my ex-husband. I did not post anything. I went back to my apartment and I slept for 11 hours. He found out 2 months later. I don't know exactly how. I suspect someone from the tech press mentioned the deal and someone who knew someone connected it back to him. However it happened, I got a call on a Saturday afternoon in January. I was making tea. It was cold outside, and the lake had that flat, pewter look it gets in deep winter, and I looked at his name on my phone for a moment before I answered. I heard, he said. Okay, I said. 87 million. He said it the way you'd say the name of a city you'd never been to and always meant to visit. From a game engine? From my game engine, I said. That I built, in our spare bedroom. That you thought was a hobby. There was a silence. Then, I think we should talk. About what? About Fiona, technically, some of that development happened during the marriage. I'd like to get a legal opinion on. You should do that, I said. Please do get a legal opinion. He did. 3 weeks later, his lawyer called Rosalind. Rosalind called me. She was, for the first time in our professional relationship, smiling when she said my name. They're arguing the engine was developed during the marriage and should be considered a joint marital asset, she said. And? I said. And the separation agreement you signed has a clause that explicitly addresses independently developed intellectual property funded through personal inheritance and not commercialized during the marriage. She paused. He signed it. His lawyer approved it. It is airtight. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I don't know why the floor. It just seemed like the right altitude for that moment. He has no claim, Rosalind said. No, I said. No, I said. None. I had one more interaction with him in person. He came to the building. My building now. I'd moved into a condo in the West End by then, high enough to see the city properly, on a Tuesday evening in February. It was the kind of cold that makes Toronto feel like a different planet, the wind off the lake cutting through everything. He was standing in the lobby when I came home from dinner with Josephine in his good coat with his collar turned up, and for a second I saw the man I had married and felt the ghost of something I didn't have a name for. He wanted to talk. He had some things he wanted to say. He was sorry, he said. about how things had gone, about some of the things he'd said. Like what? I asked. He paused. I may have been dismissive. You told your colleagues I was your greatest disappointment, I said, at a dinner at our house, while I was in the kitchen getting the wine. He looked at me. I didn't know you heard that. I know, I said. That's the part that mattered. She was with him, I found out later from a mutual acquaintance. She'd been waiting around the corner, apparently, in the car. His new partner, the woman from the leasing division, had come along because she thought she might be helpful. She apparently had some thoughts about what I should do with the money. What the fair thing would be. What a generous person would consider. She never came upstairs. The concierge and I have an understanding. He stood in my lobby for a few more minutes. He said a few more things. At one point, I think he was genuinely trying to apologize in the way of a man who has never had to get very good at it. I listened. I let him finish. Then I said, I hope you're well. I really do, but you should go. And I took the elevator up alone. There is a thing that happens after you get out of a situation like that no one really prepares you for. You expect to feel triumphant. You expect the $87 million to feel like a firework. It doesn't, not really. What it feels like is more like quiet, like the apartment after a dinner party, when everyone has finally gone home and you're standing in the kitchen with a glass of water, and everything is still, and the mess is there, but it's your mess, and you are the only one who decides what gets cleaned up first. My grandmother left me $20,000 and the knowledge that she had spent 40 years building things that people said would never work. She was an engineer. She worked on infrastructure projects across northern Ontario in the 80s and 90s, when women in that field were a novelty that had to justify its existence every single day. She never complained about it, from what my mother told me. She just built things. The engine I developed, the one the company licensed, has her name in the documentation. In the copyright line, Elsie M. Calloway, from whom the initial capital came and without whom none of this would have been possible. My ex-husband never asked about her. In 11 years, I don't think he ever asked why she mattered to me. That's the thing about being dismissed. It is rarely one large dramatic moment. It is the accumulation of unasked questions. The dinners where your work doesn't come up. The rooms you are ushered out of so the adults can talk. The coffee you have been making for 11 years, set beside a laptop that never once looked up. Josephine and I had lunch last spring on a patio in Kensington Market. The good kind of Toronto afternoon where the city feels like it's trying its best. She asked me if I missed him. I thought about it honestly. I miss who I thought he was going to be, I said. She nodded. That's a different grief. It is. But it has a bottom, and I found mine. Rosalind sends me a card every year at Christmas. It says the same thing, good building. I think it's her version of a toast. I am still building. The studio is small, but it is entirely mine. The new project is something I am not going to talk about yet. Not because I'm hiding it, but because I've learned that some things need the quiet to grow. I have a balcony now. The lake is visible on clear days. In the mornings, I make my own coffee, exactly the way I like it, and I do not set it beside anything I don't want to. I don't need someone to believe in what I'm building. I never did, actually. I just needed long enough to remember that. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to build something when no one believes you're building anything at all. Not the dramatic version of that, not the montage, not the triumphant moment when the number gets read out loud. The quieter version. The version where you're in a small room for 6 years and the person on the other side of the wall has already decided what you are, and you have to decide whether their certainty becomes yours. What I know now is that the outcome, the deal, the clause, the look on his face, wasn't the result of luck or timing. It was the result of choices that started long before any of that. My grandmother Elsie made the same kind of choices in a different era, in field sites across northern Ontario where people also told her what she was and wasn't capable of. She didn't argue with them. She just kept building. And when she left me that $20,000, I think she was leaving me something more than capital. She was leaving me a way of moving through the world, the honest version of integrity, not the word on a motivational poster. But the thing itself is continuing to do the work accurately and carefully, even when no one is watching and no one is impressed. For years, my husband wasn't watching. His colleagues weren't watching. His colleagues weren't watching. And I kept documenting, filing, protecting, building, not to prove something to them, but because the work deserved that care. That turns out to matter enormously when a licensing team and a room full of lawyers need to understand precisely what belongs to whom. The clarity I brought to those legal decisions, the clause Rosalind added, the structure of my studio's ownership, the way I'd kept my grandmother's inheritance separated and documented from the beginning, that didn't come from being clever for its own sake. It came from paying attention, from asking the right questions before they became urgent, from understanding that thinking things through carefully in advance is not paranoia, it is respect for your own future. I was 38 when the deal closed. I had spent most of my 30s being told in small, consistent ways that I was not serious. Thinking seriously about my work was the one form of resistance that never required anyone's permission. And then there's the part that's hardest to talk about, staying. Not in the marriage. I mean, staying with the work through the years when it gave nothing back. There were stretches where the engine wasn't cooperating, where the funding felt impossible, where I sat in that second bedroom and genuinely didn't know if I was building something or disappearing into one. Josephine would ask how it was going and I'd say, fine, in the tone that means, I don't know and I'm afraid to look too closely. That kind of persistence isn't glamorous. It doesn't make for a good story in the middle. It only becomes a story at all if you don't stop. What I want to say to anyone sitting in their own version of that room is this. The people who dismiss you are not seeing the whole picture. That is not a comfort. It is information. Keep building anyway. Protect what you're building with the same seriousness you'd want others to bring to it. Think ahead, stay honest, and don't hand your measuring stick to someone who has already decided what you're worth. The lake is visible from my window this morning. I made my coffee exactly the way I like it. That's where I'm starting from.